Hello, everybody. This is our December monthly event. So as always, we want to thank our sponsors, Slalom and Precocity, for allowing us to bring you this content about service design. We're going to try to be a little bit faster than usual because we have a quite interesting topic today that may actually go a bit long. So I want to be respectful of our panelists and give them as much time as they can to go through those topics. So as always, so we are Service Design Network Dallas. So I am Greg Laclouvi, and we have Brendan Ward here, Christopher Robin, and Brenda. And we are here to help you discover new ways of doing service design and do some knowledge share. This is being recorded, as we just discussed. So if you are not able to stay with us for the whole hour, just know that you will probably be able to catch the end of it tonight. We try to be as thorough as possible, but it may take several hours to actually load onto the YouTube channel. So if it's not there tonight, it will be there tomorrow morning. So bear with us. But you can also see the past sessions we've had with, I think we have about 15 now. As Brendan was mentioning, if you have any question for us or for the panel, feel free to reach out in the chat room. So just make sure we understand your question for the panel. So make it obvious that I would like to ask Elisa or Victor or Nora or the panel, so we can pick those out and we can kind of like look at them and we can hang on to them and ask them after we are going to the end. I would ask of you to not wait the last minute to ask a question, because we're going to be going down to like 12:45 or whatever time it is in your country. So we'd rather have a lot of questions. We can kind of like go through it and not be like stuck at the end and have 5 minutes to ask 25 questions. So don't be shy. Just ask a question as soon as you have a question, and we just hang on to it. Today, it's actually part 2. We had a very, very good first panel, I think several months ago, about government work that was more localized, with somebody from San Francisco, somebody from Fannie Mae. And we talked about a bit more like localized and regional government work, which was wonderful, but we decided to kind of like open it up to like larger government work, right? So like on a national and global scale, and having like large agencies. So today we actually have a panel that's going to be talking to this. Quick note, our 3 panelists here work for government agencies or incubators within the government, GSA, that help all the agencies in the US government to do service design work, right? So we can't necessarily discuss too much about what they do, with which agency they do, because some of the stuff is pretty, confidential, obviously. So if they can't answer exactly the question you have, please bear in mind they're just not allowed to, or it would just be not appropriate for them to tell you specific details. So keep that in mind, okay? Today, so welcome Elisa, Victor, and Nora. So Elisa is an innovation specialist. I'm going to give you just a few minutes to introduce yourself, if you don't mind. So Elisa, Victor, and Nora, tell us quickly who you are, what you do, and what is kind of like the space that you are involved. And then we'll just start asking you some tough questions. Elisa, you want to start?
Great, thank you. And thank you all for the opportunity. I'm excited to be here. My name is Elisa Chen. I work at 18F, innovation specialist here. And for those who may not be familiar with 18F, it is a digital service consultancy that sits within the US General Services Administration, or the GSA. And so the GSA helps manage and support, the basic functioning of federal government agencies, whether that's kind of real estate or acquisition, technology, et cetera. So it has its hands in many things. And so 18F sits within that, and we are a diverse group of strategists, designers, engineers, et cetera. And we partner with different government agencies to improve the experience of the user experience of government services and help build and buy technology. We are a remote first team, so we are spread out all across the US, and we practice and use human-centered and agile practices in what we do. We leverage product and service-oriented thinking and open source tools to really co-solution with our government partners and build capacities in certain areas. So that's a little bit about 18F. My background is interesting and varied. I started out in the private sector management consulting world, moved into nonprofit international development. Both of those times, working in strategy, in innovation, and now find myself in government sector. So I really enjoyed my varied pathway here, and I will pass it along to Victor.
Hi, my name is Victor Udoewa. I work with NASA. Some of you may know that it's the USA's Aeronautics and Astronautics Agency. And there I'm a service designer. I do that work in customer experience strategy. And to highlight a little bit of what Elisa said, I'm actually working on a project with 18F. You'll find that those of us who are in other parts of the government that are not in these unique innovation labs or hubs like an 18F, like a US Digital Service, many of us are still growing in some of those competencies and skills, learning how to better do human-centered design and agile and lean startup. Whereas I think 18F is further along, and they're helping us as we try to do some of that work. I have a mixed background as well. I've done for-profit, nonprofit, and public sector. In fact, I used to work at 18F with Elisa and Nora. I took a year off, and now I came right back and recently started with NASA about a month and a half ago. Nora?
Victor. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I work at 18F alongside Elisa, formerly with Victor, and she gave an excellent introduction to the work of 18F, so I don't have anything to add there. So just a little bit about my background is I actually come from a visual art background and sort of found myself in the organizational change space. So I've been doing work with organizations at different scales, from super local to international, to help them incorporate innovation and technology into their work. And that led me here to 18F and GSA. So looking forward to the conversation today. Right. Greg, back to you.
Thank you, Nora. Just one more question. Is 18F kind of like a rotational incubator? So you actually do a short stint, so to speak, and you actually move to other places? How it works?
Go ahead, Elisa.
I was going to say, yes, most of the folks in 18F are term limited, meaning they are there for a finite amount of time, between 2 to 4 years. So these, again, are folks from varying backgrounds. We've got folks coming in from the nonprofit, from the private sector, working in universities, et cetera. And so I think that's part of the strength of having a diverse perspective of team members. But yes, we typically folks stay for a certain amount of time before their term is up.
Okay. So if anyone on this call wants to join 18F or be involved with 18F, it's an open request. I mean, you have to, it's a government work, right? So you have to apply to it, or only from agencies to 18F, then back to agencies?
Yeah, so anyone can apply. So you don't have to work for a government agency before joining 18F. Yeah.
Okay, so you can just go for like, gsa.gov and kind of look for jobs at 18F, and there will be open positions, maybe.
Yeah, or look at the 18F website, which postings are there as well.
Okay, cool, sounds good. So if that's okay with you, I have some questions, which I think you are going to somehow, organically figure who answers which one. Are you guys ready for that? All right, let's do it. So how would you define service design? This is something I know comes up every single time, right? So you ask 10 people a definition, you have 12 answers. What are different definitions that exist within the public sector, which is most likely what we want to know from you today? Who wants to start?
I'll start with this one. It's a great question because there are many definitions. I think the way that we think about it, and I think we do agree, Nora and Elisa and I, is that it is researching, designing, prototyping, implementing both a service, but also the business mechanisms and mechanics behind the service. So I think Nora would say it's all about making the invisible behind the service visible, because those invisible elements often influence the service in a way that affects the customer's experience. Another way to think about it is to contrast it a bit with product design, right? So you do product design to improve the user experience. With service design, you do service design to improve the customer experience across a range of products. It can be multiple products, but also all offline and online interactions, any kind of touch points, whether it's in person, a help desk, through phone, email, any type of interaction. We're looking at the entire thing and seeing if we can make a consistent experience and improve the customer experience. One of the things that allows you to do is to say, oh, this this product that I want to design and work on may not be the biggest pain point across the service ecosystem and service pipeline. It might actually be over here. So if you have limited resources and time, having a service design mindset allows you to kind of see where in the service pipeline ecosystem is the most optimal place to reduce customer pain points and improve their experience. The second way I would differentiate it to product design is that with product design, you work on the user experience. With service design, you work on the customer experience and you work on the employee experience. So we improve the customer experience directly, but we also improve the employee experience, which indirectly affects the customer experience. Now, in terms of the second question, I've seen a few different definitions because, in digital, I'll give you 4 definitions. In the digital space, there's a thin line between products and services because you don't carry the physical product. And is it in the cloud? Is it on my computer? Do I own it? So some people actually, when they say service design, they just mean they actually do product design for a digital product that offers a service. That's what they mean. Some people, when they say service design, they just mean that they design multiple digital products, like a suite. And that could be valid, that could count. Sometimes they're connected, sometimes they're not connected. But if the same customer is interacting for a common purpose across those, that could work. Sometimes people mean they're applying a service design mindset, meaning they're breaking down silos between groups. They're considering what we call dark matter, the policy constraints and regulations that you don't see. And they're just bringing that mindset into the work that they do, which you have to do in government because it's so prevalent and it affects all you do. And then lastly is, I would say, is what I just described, designing to improve a customer experience across multiple products and all interactions, not just online, but also offline.
Very good. Nora or Elisa, do you want to add a little bit to it? No? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Next one. What makes designing for the government agencies different and more challenging than other sectors or industries?
Yeah, I'm happy to start this one. I think one thing coming from the private sector and also the nonprofit sector, something that was, and now working in government for the first time, I realized that, the underlying goals and intentions of each of the sectors that you work in are different, right? So coming from the private sector is very bottom line driven, right? And now working for government, it's not so much bottom line anymore because it's different. And so this idea or this notion of like the intention or the context of a sector plays a huge role or makes a difference in how work is executed and how tools might be applied or utilized. So that's one thing that I have noticed that's very different. As for like things that are challenging, I think, and I'm sure this is not new for folks, but like designing for change or for quick change at least is hard in government, right? Government's big, it's complex, it's been around for some time, right? It's got some deep roots. So you can't change government overnight. It wasn't built for that. It's built on a foundation of checks and balances, and it does that for a reason. So government structures are very embedded. There are structures that have a lot of interdependencies, both within one agency, but also across agencies. And so if you think about, like, for example, a service that you provide, for example, if you're helping veterans get access to healthcare or loans, et cetera, you have to really kind of peel back layers within one agency. So it might be the Department of Veterans Affairs, but then you're also having to peel back other layers in other agencies as well. So it might be the Department of Labor or Health and Human Services or Consumer Financial and Protection Bureau. And so making that service entirely like seamless to the user can be challenging because there's so many different structures in play and interdependencies in play.
So Elisa, tell us, how do you manage that? Because all of us work within a very finite business line, right? So the sheer amount of stakeholders you have in a government is just like, it's 100 times what I probably deal with, right? If I have 1,000 people to talk to or have to like 30 interviews, you may very well have 300 people who need to be aware or informed about decisions you're going to be making. So how do you manage this versus working for one client, one line of business, one business, you just say you may actually have like 4 very large entities to deal with. How do you navigate?
Artfully. It is, there is definitely no silver bullet solution, but I think this notion of how do you create shared alignment and a shared vision together where, the system wasn't built to look at things in that way is really important. So, it's not just, when you're working in government, it's not just about the service design or design thinking or a particular approach. But again, it's going back to this notion of how do you execute that within a particular context, which is really important. So each of those large agencies operate within kind of their own context, their own way of working or culture. And so having to go into these situations with a lot of humility and listening first is absolutely necessary to understand how things work in each of these agencies, and then defining collectively, how do you create that shared vision? What is the shared goal that is trying to be achieved? So, yeah.
Nora, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Elisa, everything she said. I think, that some of that challenge is that the structure of organizations tends to come through in the experience of the services. And, you see that those different, even within an agency, different entities own different parts of the service. They have different budget lines and across agencies. And part of that alignment that Elisa's talking about, I think, is also looking for opportunities to decouple the public experience from the organizational structure and operations, right? Maybe sometimes you need to make some changes to the organizational structure and how things are happening, but there are also opportunities, especially in the digital space, to think about, can we provide a cohesive experience where everyone is sort of funneling their piece into that shared thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean reworking the entire back end of the service. And so I think that there's a lot of thinking that direction right now in government. And, it's also important to remember that like government has been designing and delivering services for centuries, right? Like our government has been delivering services since its very first days. And a lot of that, like a lot of earlier services that government created maybe were really focused on service coverage. Maybe think about like the post office or Social Security. Like, how do we expand services to all parts of the country, right? The post office delivers to every household in America. They reach places that private sector companies do not. And now with more digital and multi-channel services, I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift more towards the experience side of services and thinking about, okay, what is the experience of somebody going through this service? Not just does this service exist for everyone who might want it, but are we providing a really exceptional and quality experience for those people?
So Victor, so I was going to ask you, Victor, we know where you work, so at least we get to be a bit more practical. So tell us, for example, NASA is probably a very, very, very large organization made of like a huge ecosystem of like contractors and vendors and partners. It's probably a very large organization to deal with. So how do you actually do what Nora and Elisa just talked about practically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with bringing everyone to the table. A lot of problems occur, I think, when you begin to do the work without everyone's input or involvement. And then you realize, oh, we forgot about a particular group or of stakeholders' needs. We've done something that doesn't work for certain people. So it really requires us to break those silos. NASA, as well as many organizations, don't do the work alone. They partner with not just universities, but large businesses, small businesses, et cetera, to kind of advance this in this whole ecosystem of aerospace work. And so it behooves us, and it behooves a lot of agencies, to make sure that the way that we do the work we're doing and the services we're offering work for everyone. Now, related to kind of what Nora said is the issue. I think Nora mentioned service coverage, and that's one of the, in terms of this question, one of the two things that I see as a challenge, where when I worked in the private sector, my executives, sponsors, my managers might say something like, well, it doesn't, let's just not worry about that 20% of the population, or we're not going to worry about those 15% of people. We'll just wait until they are able to earn more money or get a smartphone and move up from their, tier 2 phone or tier 3 phone. We would just drop people off because they knew they could make money regardless. Whereas here, what I think makes it hard, like Nora said, is that the mission of the government is to serve all of particular people that are potential recipients of a service. So with like the postal service, you can't say, oh, well, those people live far away from the main road or kind of up on a mountain, so we're not going to worry about delivering the mail. You have to be able to deliver the mail to everyone. So that makes it hard, but it's something that some of us love, having that mission and trying to reach that. The second thing I would mention that makes it also really hard for me is that we don't often have the business mechanisms that exist in the private sector that force private sector companies to adapt to customer needs or user needs. So I worked on a product a few years ago where very few people were using it, maybe less than 2,000 hits a year. No one liked it. The people that were using it were forced to use it by law. And it had both government and non-government people, just a mix of people that were using it. And it received funding every single year because it was guaranteed through the government budget, regardless of whether it met needs or didn't meet needs, because of this tax revenue and how things work. And so I think without that type of mechanism where you lose ad revenue or fee for service or subscription or whatever it is, you aren't always forced to adapt. Now that mindset is growing in government, don't get me wrong, but it's not a requirement that forces you to adapt. So that makes it hard as well.
Very good. Let's move to the next question. Is that okay? Why do you think employing service design is particularly important now, and particularly for government work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something that I've thought about is, just this overlying, like, what is the environment in which, we're working in now, and just recognizing that in the past few decades, we've shifted from this product to a more service-oriented economy where we're, primarily producing services, and design should address things now that are more service-oriented. And so the government, as Nora and Victor both mentioned, is primarily in the business of providing services, right? Sending mail, getting a passport, et cetera. And a lot of these services are becoming more digital, or delivered in a multi-channel platform. And so designing with this context or understanding of that end-to-end customer experience will produce, better digital services and provide more value for the public. So leveraging service design, in that mindset and all the tools that come with that is particularly effective now as government is kind of going towards this orientation and acknowledging that, government is a provider of many, many services that all Americans need.
Yeah, and I'll add to that there are a lot of instances in the government where a particular service comes from multiple different agencies in the government. So you need service design to help coordinate that work across those agency silos so that you can improve the experience. Also, I said this before, the size of the government is so large that oftentimes when you have limited resources and time, you might make a suboptimal decision to work on a particular part of a service, just this product that I'm overseeing, without having that service design mindset to look across it to find the best opportunity at which to improve the customer experience. The other things I would say is that I've never seen a product in government that doesn't sit inside of a service. The government is super large. I think there's at least 2 to 3 million workers, and then there's more contractors. So if improving the experience of the government employees and the contractors that do the work is really integral to improving that experience. And then the US still has, I want to say somewhere between 25% at most, 20% of people that are offline. So we still, because the mission is to reach all people, there's still a lot of government services that have offline, non-digital components.
Nora, you want to add something?
Good on that.
Okay. how do you do service design with people that don't understand it or know what it is? That sounds a little rough around the edges, but that's something we do all the time in the private sector, right? We actually educate a lot. I'm assuming you do the same thing on the government side, right? So tell us about you going and creating alignment with people in multiple organizations who don't even know what is it you're talking about or what you're doing. How do you work that out?
Yeah, I can jump in here first. So I think, as you're saying, it's really important, and it does depend on the audience. Before I talk about agencies, I think that even internally, this is a conversation that we have within 18F, within TTS, within GSA, right? As digital service professionals in government, it's really important for us to have alignment on our shared understanding of what service design is, what terms and methods are part of our toolkit that we bring to our work, how it fits in our work, and being able to recognize when it's called for on a project, since we do work with really cross-functional teams of people who may have varying levels of experience with service design. So that's something that's part of our internal conversation often, is how do we kind of introduce these in baseline a certain set of knowledge and skills. And then with agency partners, we tend to work very collaboratively, and as Victor called me out earlier, I see it as really like making visible the parts of a service and involving people in the process of service design, often even without using the words. I think, we're introducing a lot of new ideas, a lot of new processes in our work with agency partners. And so really trying to let them participate in the process without getting into the more academic or theoretical side can be a really effective way of introducing these in practice. So tactically, one thing I often do is just like bring folks together from across those silos. It's like, all right, we know at least that these 5 or 6 teams touch different parts of this process. Let's bring them all in a room and map out what everybody does with a swim lane for each team, because people know their own workflows. They just often don't know what the other team's workflow is. And so being able to put all of those workflows visually in the same place together, which is often the first time people are looking at them all together that way, can really help then open the door to having that bigger conversation of, okay, now we're looking at, we thought we were talking about this workflow, but now we see that we're talking about this whole service and all of these different pieces. And it also helps reveal who might be missing from the conversation, right? There are often people who aren't there. We realize, we don't actually know what happens at this step or who that's handed off to. And that can be a great way to generate research questions for the user research that we do with partners also.
So Nora, you make it sound very easy, but obviously time management, scheduling, you say, we just got a bunch of people in the room together, right? I struggle doing this when I'm working in the same building, same floor, getting marketing and to be in the same room is difficult. So how do you manage to get those 35 people from different places, different governments to actually just come in the same room? How do you make it happen? Do you have the authorities go, hey, I'm Nora, I work for 18F, you do what I say? Or...
Yeah, everyone has to listen to me. Not the authority, but I think there is something to what you're saying, that we do have a little bit of an advantage coming in as an outside group with an agency to call for people to gather folks together. And that's something that we let partners know really early on, is hey, we're going to ask you to help connect us to other folks who might be relevant to this. So I think, coming in that capacity can make it easier to mobilize the people you need in the room. I'd be curious for Victor's thoughts here on what it's like being embedded in an agency, how that impacts your ability to pull people together. But just helping teams make those connections. I've seen people exchange email addresses who have never worked together before, and then we should be talking all of the time. So even if that happens in a more fragmented way initially, I think there's ways to work your way there.
So Victor, again, let's use some super practical stuff because we know where you work. So if you are doing something and somebody says, hey, you should probably have some people from JPL in this room. Okay, you have to go hunt for names. You have to go find somebody. It's kind of like, I need somebody who works in engineering at JPL. There's probably 1,000 people on that list. So how do you somehow claw your way through the JPL organization and kind of find the one guy that you need to be in that room?
I think in my work anyway, it's a lot about relationship management, I guess. So we don't go and look for people right when we need them. We're always creating relationships and establishing them so that when we need greater participation, we already have connections to people. They're already constantly informing our work. Of course, there's always a first time when you kind of reach out, but you know, we try to establish that and anticipate those types of needs. One of the program that I work on is the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and one of the things that we have done is to create a conference, like bring everyone together and find out whether you're a research institution, your small business, what are the ways that you can work with NASA or partner with NASA, how can you get this information? And it's been really, really useful as another component of our service offering, both for developing relationships where we have those kind of connections to people at various organizations, but also in helping them better understand how to navigate that, how to partner with that, and how to begin to provide technology that can be useful. And remember, a lot of the technology at NASA isn't just for NASA. It ends up being commercialized and used in the world.
Cool. Let's move to the next question, okay, Dio, because we are already at 12:30. Cool. What do you foresee designing for public works becoming 5 years from now? Same or more the private sector? So we kind of touched up a little bit on that, public, private, and how do you see those two universe merging or colliding or not? Elisa?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and I think Nora and Victor probably will chime in here, but I definitely see this growing excitement and use of design thinking, user-centered design, service design in government. This increasing focus has been made evident in different types of agendas. You go and Google the president's management agenda, it calls out for more effective customer interaction and engagement. And they've put together a cross-agency priority to improve customer experience in federal services. So, we talked about earlier, how do these different agencies come together? And sometimes it's a top-down initiative, like something as this priority where it calls together agencies to kind of figure out a problem. And so, as I see, looking ahead, I definitely see, more of this focus of how do we as government become more user-centric, human-centered, and how do we continue employing things like service design in the ways in which we work, and how do we continue to collaborate with one another, not even within just government, but outside as well. So yeah, those are my high-level thoughts.
Victor, Nora?
Go ahead, Victor.
The only thing I would add is just that in 2018, there was a bill that was introduced in Congress. It became law, I think, in January 2019, which I'll call the Evidence Act for short. It has a longer name, but it requires all agencies to create a learning agenda, which is something that you commonly use when you're working on knowledge management practices to support organizational learning. What works, what doesn't work, what about our methods and our theory of change needs to be altered. And to designate someone as a chief or head evaluations officer, but just building up basically the evaluation science capability of agencies so that they can evaluate what is working in terms of helping us to reach our goals and the impact that we're having on people. I mention that because I've been in conversations recently where we're talking about how we can bring that into service design. So I'm even talking about the gold standard in evaluations, which is randomized controlled trials, and how we can begin to experiment with different service prototypes and experiments and begin to see how effective are they for people who experience a service versus people who don't experience a service. So I think it'll be a bit more rigorous in terms of evaluation.
Next question, and Laura, you want to add something? Are design methodologies and tools different in the public versus private sector? And we're talking about basic research, discovery, double diamond kind of methodology, mind frame, blueprinting.
Yeah, I can start. Going back to my previous comment around, context drives a lot of tools and methodologies and how they're applied. And so I would say, the tools aren't really that different. You'll still see, a journey map in the private sector and also in in government, and they look the same. But I think the application of that tool might look, or how it's executed or how it's socialized might vary a little bit. Yeah.
So for example, again, to go back to, one client, one business, one problem, or one suite of problem is fairly concise to do on the blueprint, for example. If you actually have multiple agencies, like the VA you said earlier, like, no, it's just the VA, they actually have some ancillary agencies involved in the process. Is the blueprint kind of like a bit of a nightmare to kind of like keep, in check?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely complex. So as Nora was kind of referring to earlier, you might start out with just this one flow, and then you add on to it, and then you add on to it, and then you realize the level of connections or interdependencies that are happening within that process. And so it can become, that blueprint or that journey map might become a beast very quickly. And so, ensuring that all folks, again, are in the room to kind of start at the same point is really critical. Yeah.
Cool. Victor? Yeah, what Elisa said, it sounds good. You might even, so yeah, I have blueprints that are by customer blueprints with, two different sets of customers. And it does get crazy and convoluted. I've done cases, and I know Nora has examples of this as well, where I've created a systems map. So I've made a robust systems map because of the craziness of trying to map out something where a service blueprint isn't necessarily the best tool, and where I can get a high-level systems view of all the interconnected relationships between forces and actors. That can sometimes be helpful. But in general, the tools I feel like are the same. I will say that sometimes I work with government employees that need help contextualizing it. Sometimes there are government employees that can just transfer it. Like, I'll take this and I'll transfer it, but some need you to put it within the government context. So a good example is like taking a business model canvas and making a lean impact canvas, for instance. It helps some people to frame it in their context.
Nora?
Yeah, I agree with all that, and would just add that I think in my experience, as Victor said, the artifacts can be great, and we do have partners who have, the giant printed out blueprints and systems maps hanging in their offices, which is great. But I think the act of participating in the creation of those artifacts is always going to be like a more meaningful and impactful thing than producing an artifact and sharing it out with the group. I think especially in government, because it allows people to own the outcome of that and continue to change it over time as things change.
Let's talk about the outcome for a second. So one of the critical phases of service design is the implementation, right? So we do a lot of work, there's a lot of downstream work. And then the implementation is when it actually becomes reality, right? It's no longer an idea, it's no longer a future state. In the private world, it's fairly easy. You make a recommendation, they either have the money or the will or the resources, the bandwidth, and it happens, right? So, or it doesn't. What about government work? I mean, is it kind of like, do you feel like he kind of like gets on somebody's shelf and just dies there? Or it's actually easier, harder to actually just push it through? Anybody?
It's a great question. We might all have slightly different perspectives, but I think, kind of in keeping with an overall like agile approach to digital services, right? That we always, even when you're talking about like a massive service that has all sorts of different steps, is still trying to break off a slice of that that's achievable and deliverable within some normal amount of time, and breaking the work into chunks that way that each small piece can deliver value and show results. I think that same approach can be taken in service design as in product development. And so depending on the length of our engagements, right, we may be with a partner just through sort of that initial strategy, or we may be able to help them deliver that first piece or first couple of pieces And I think where it sometimes differs is it's in service design, right? You want to think about like horizontal slices as well, in addition to like the vertical slices that you might normally think about in product development. Victor or Elisa, want to add?
Yeah, the thing I also add is, at 18F, I think we try to very intentionally co-solution partner with, our government agencies on projects. So this notion of learning by doing, right? Like that's where you kind of get those knowledge bomb moments where you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think about it this way before. And that's when I think change really happens, right? Because it's one thing to read and see something on a piece of paper. It's another thing to experience the change. And so, in a lot of our engagements, when we are, starting certain rituals or practices or employing certain methodologies or working through a problem, we very much want to incorporate our partners in that process so they can see, feel, experience, and learn, so that when the engagement ends, they're just not left with, recommendations, but also an understanding of how they can move that forward.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say is that I think sometimes being a service manager, if it's not really a term. There are service managers, but they have various other terms like portfolio director or just director or experience officer or whatever the term is. But someone who's over a service kind of reminds me a little bit of like being like a director of product, if that's the right term, where there are multiple products, or maybe you have one product, but there are multiple product teams that cover different feature sets. So there is coordination and communication and agreement and buy-in that's needed, because sometimes something that you uncover for your piece of the service or through your work needs the help or coordination with someone on a different piece. And if there isn't that type of agreement or coordination or that kind of buy-in, then it can be hard. I was on a project a few years ago where that happened. We were doing research, and then we uncovered user needs for the service, and the people who needed to implement it were not the people who were the small team that was doing the research, and they were under a different management, and they didn't agree. Like, we didn't find that out, so why should we do this? You take care of it. We can't take care of it. It's part of the thing that you provide. So that it is harder, I've experienced, compared to a small product. It's harder to do this work for either a large product or a service where you have multiple moving parts.
Got it. We are 45 minutes in. Let me see if we can do maybe one more question. Let's do this one, and then we'll move to actual questions, right? So designers want to make the world a better place. Is government work the best place to be truly impactful? Let's start with Victor. Again, let's play the NASA card, right? So, do you feel that survey design at NASA is actually an awesome thing to do? Do you feel kind of like I'm surrounded like a bunch of engineers who don't really understand what I'm doing? And so walk us through, how is it to do survey design for NASA?
Yeah, I advocate that you do the work where you can. It's a luxury if you can find a place to do the work that aligns with the mission that you hold, that you embody, that's within you. So I think government is a great place, and for me, it has been the best place so far, because the impact is larger, the potential impact. The tough part is the time horizon is longer and the effort is higher. So you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. It won't move as fast as it might in the private sector. It won't necessarily be as easy as an executive director making a decision or someone like that. But if you're okay with that and you enjoy that type of transformation type work, I think it's a great place. Second thing is, remember that you can do government work. I'm glad you worded it as government work, because you can do government work as a nonprofit contractor or award recipient, or as a for-profit contractor or grant recipient.
Brandon and Robin, do you want to have some Q&A questions from the panel?
Absolutely. I can kick it off here with the first question that came in from Katie Kelly. And Katie asks, how do you deal with the rampant duplication, not just delivering the new experience, but seeing the detritus is cleaned up afterwards? This is for the panel, for anyone.
I can jump in. I would just say probably something similar to what I just said about the like sort of breaking it apart into pieces approach, that like ideally you're not just creating a whole separate new thing, but you are kind of slowly replacing the thing that's there, and doing it in chunks. So you replace one piece of it with something better, and then that piece goes away. That's all I've got on that. Victor or Elisa?
Yeah, same thing. Again, related to that whole service design vision, you see the duplication. You don't even just see the duplication, you also see the opportunity, the white space, like, oh my gosh, there's a part of the service that's underdeveloped. We're not serving this third customer we have. We need to create something there. So it works both ways, but that's part of having that vision and creating better efficiencies. Yeah.
Did you want to add something, Elisa? Okay.
Next question.
Robin, you got the next one?
Yep. This one came from Debbie. So this is kind of in context of your one of the earlier questions, but recommendations for stakeholder analysis, identification, factors to consider, etc. You guys have any tips, tools, tricks?
Yeah, something I was going to mention earlier about, how do we get folks aligned, engaged, on the same page? And an acronym I like to think about before we start an engagement is, I don't know if y'all have heard of this, but WIFM and WAMI, which is WIFM, what's in it for me, what's working against my interest. And so, mentally in my head, when I start an engagement, I realize there is a cross-section of folks, who are being involved. I want to think about what is in it for them in this engagement, for this problem. What skin in the game do they have? What's working against their interest? And then that helps me contextualize, and frame whether that's the project scope or how they're involved, et cetera.
Yeah, that's I think that's universal too. I don't think that just applies to government for sure. Any other panelists have thoughts on that to add?
We do a lot of work, all three of us, with trying to, again, what Nora says, make the invisible visible. So it's really important also to look for what we call shadow stakeholders who are not in the room, but really greatly influence the service or product that you're working on. And so there are various ways of trying to get to that. But the first step is being aware that they may exist, and trying to do the work and the research and build the relationships that unearth and surface them, and then bring them to the table so that they take part.
That's a new term for me, and I'm going to use it because I have experienced them. I just didn't know what to call them.
You just like the way it sounds.
I do. I want to point at somebody and say, you're a shadow stakeholder, aren't you? All right, Brandon.
Those are the best, though. Like, who's the hippo and what's their WIFM and their whammy, you stakeholder shadow you? I love the words that our industry comes up with. They're fantastic. I know WIFM's been around a long while, but I never
know why they don't understand what we're doing.
So the next question comes from Moises Araya. He says, panel, how do you plan for long-term strategic initiatives, like 5 to 10, I assume, years out, with constant change in power and personnel?
And I'm going to say it's kind of a weird question because this is what we do. I mean, like, I'm currently working on like a 2030 roadmap or plan, right? So it's not really that big of a deal. We're speaking like, again, let's use Victor again. But I'm guessing Victor is working on some like 2040, 2050 stuff. So the same question, but just a bit of a longer strategic planning.
Yeah, these are good questions. These are very, very juicy. I think what we try to do, I don't know if Elisa and Nora would say this, is move away from that. Again, there are lots of agencies and divisions and bureaus that have this as a set policy. We create 5-year, 10-year strategic plans, and I get that. But what we're trying to do, and I do this work, I have done this work, where we try to get people to be a bit more agile. So creating a strategy, even actually creating a vision and a mission, and then a strategy that comes out of that, and then maybe a roadmap that comes out of that on an annual basis. come back and revisit that because things have changed. So let's actually revisit our vision and mission, because maybe we need to alter that. Maybe we don't, but let's look at our strategy. So that basically the whole point is that we can remain committed, right, to the objectives and goals, but be agile with respect to the initiatives, the tasks, the jobs that we do when we see that the key results are not being met. But a 5, 10, 20-year distance is way too long. So even in agencies where it's required, like that's the process. And sometimes people think it's required and it's not required by law, but there are times where it is. You can in small ways begin to create space for small changes to have quicker cycles where we learn. And so I try to do it on a much smaller cycle for at least pieces within a division or a portfolio or agency.
Even if it's a very long, like let's say, for example, like a trip to Mars, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen in 5 years, right? So you apply the same thinking to that, kind of revise every year what's happening, what you've learned, what's failed, what's success you had.
Well, so I've never like worked on a trip to Mars. So this is pure conjecture. And remember, everything I say is not representative of NASA. Yeah. I'm just here as a personal, in my personal capacity. Remember that any type of mission or any type of work or project that has significant impact to life, to health, has certain, requirements that relate to things like safety, the human experience, mission assurance, technology. And so, if you find out things that are going to say, wow, the direction we're going in is not a safe one, the direction we're going will not help us achieve our mission, then you have to change. So there's a tolerance level that relates to how the new information that I have and that I've received, is this of such a level that it is critical, or is it more of something that's nice to be aware of and we can adjust, but it's not that impactful? So it all depends on that.
Got it. Any more questions, Robin, Brandon?
Yeah, I've got one here from Eva. So this was a solid one. Do you have suggestions for organizations that are public, but there's a push for it to go private, knowing there will be a loss to the more vulnerable users?
This came in when we were talking about the fact that you said in private, they will ignore a percentage of the users to their detriment, obviously, because when you include everyone benefits. But in the private sector, often they will segment it. Oh, we care about this 75, this 80%, and the 20 we don't. But in government, it's everybody is a citizen, everybody is involved, and so that's when this question was asked, and I think it's really valid. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that the question is why are you pushing, or why are people pushing to go for profit? There can be various different reasons. It may not actually be about moving to a profit motivation over a mission motivation. It could be that it puts you in a position to work with certain partnerships or what have you. And so when you consider that, there are multiple ways of being a for-profit, right? You can be a traditional one. You can be a public benefits corporation, right? Which is an actual legal IRS status where you have not just profit-based mission directive, but you can also have environmental or people-based. So like with a normal for-profit, if you're an executive and you're running a company and you take initiatives and make choices that do not maximize profits, the shareholders can actually sue you. But with a public benefits corporation, they can't, because it's actually stated in your articles of confederation that you are pursuing not just profit, but these other things. And as long as your choices and initiatives fall within that category, then it's fine. So I think there are many ways to be a for-profit. And so it kind of depends on the context of the situation. And I don't know the context, but there are ways of doing it that still allow you to keep working towards your mission.
So I'm going to kind of maybe not very close per se, but I have one more question to ask all of you. I'm just going to put it up on the screen. What is your advice for someone who wants to start doing service design for public works today? our skill set slightly different. And I know there are some 18F toolkits that are available to the public, right? Because everything you do is basically public. So do you have any kind of like advice for people who are listening to us when actually want to do public work, want to learn new skill set, want to learn new methodology or toolkits? And we will put the 18F methods into the chat so people can actually go and look into that, if that's okay with you.
I can start, particularly with the skill set one. I think the skill sets aren't necessarily different, but again, going back to this notion of like context is very different. So, if you're coming in new to government, then the ability to adapt to changing circumstances is definitely, I guess, a skill set that you'll want to have. And just this notion of like staying humble. Again, government is complex. It's been around for a long time. And so, if you are interested in, this ecosystem and how, this works, then I would say, reach out to someone who does work in government and kind of hear, their experiences of it and what their challenges are. Victor, Nora?
Hold on. So reaching someone who works in government, that's easier said than done.
Fair enough.
Obviously, there's 2 million employees in the government. So again, if I am a designer or I'm finishing design school and I really feel very passionate about doing what you guys do, what is the best way to do that? If I have no interest in for a profit organization, I just want to make the world a better place, as we said. What do you recommend to do? Just, learn things a bit differently, just spend more time into this class versus this class? Is it more like patience, is a very valuable skill in government work?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would say if you are interested, like understanding what you're interested in, I always feel like getting clarity within yourself about what your interests are always lends itself to figuring out what it is that you want to do. So I go by this inside out model. And so, whether that's like, hey, I heard or I've learned something about what VA is doing and, just explore that area further. A lot of the great work that they're doing is on websites, and you can look into it and start there. I would also say, on the 18F website, we have case studies. We also have kind of folks who comment on their experience in working in government and at 18F as well, if you kind of want a preview into what that looks like.
Nora?
I think that sometimes it can be tricky because like job descriptions and job titles for government positions often don't match what the comparable work would be. So I'd echo what Elisa said and also add look for the need and look for an entry point. Like if you know what you are interested in or you see a need, sometimes finding any entry point into that, like if you are a creative, competent person, you can shape that work, right? And demonstrate the value of new things within an organization that may not have been explicitly looking for that. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity to come into roles that might feel sort of adjacent to what you really want to be doing and help move things in, in a more exciting direction. Victor, what were you going to say?
Oh, just before we talk to Victor. So what you just said is very important. So for example, do you feel like the leadership in government is more open? So if I'm a young designer, I want to help, I reach out, I check all the boxes, right? So there are some organizations or in public sector, they have an incubation, they have an R&D lab, they actually do welcome innovation. Do you feel that that is a welcome skill in, the VA office or the FBI or whatever the agency, that they kind of like, no, we're good, thanks?
I think it depends a lot, right? Each agency has sort of like an agency level culture, and then each team within that has its own culture. So I think, what Elisa was saying about like doing some research, like see what you can find out about teams, like try to find groups in government that are doing interesting things. And maybe they're not hiring a service designer, but it seems like they're exploring some things that are more design related or technology related, where it feels like they're maybe more open to change and potential things. And that would be a good indicator that maybe that's a space where you could go and do things. And then I think like that is a skill set to practice, right? That's a skill set you need in doing government work anyway, is being able to introduce new ideas to environments that may not always be eager to receive them. So practicing that skill and being willing to be patient, as you said, Greg, I think can get you pretty far along.
Cool. Victor?
No, same thing. I was just going to say, most of the people I know who do service design don't have service design titles. So you just need a job that is willing to let you experiment, and a toolkit that some people have posted in the chat, or a job that gives you decision-making power to use some of those tools. But it's just about using it in your job that affects services for people.
Okay. Do we have one last question? Because I think that Elisa has to go pretty quickly here. So maybe a question to Elisa, or just one last question.
Yes, we do have a lot of what we were talking about. So Vicky asked a really great question, but I think we've kind of covered that a lot in chat already and with some of your other things. I guess we can end with Arpi's question. So this is from Arpi Dragfi. This is for everybody, but Elisa, I know you have to go first. So if you could chime in real quick. When do you believe that accessibility guidelines will become mandatory for government services? Like WCAG 3.0 will be released soon and will be expanded into low language proficiency and a new scoring system that will also make it easier to implement. So that was the question. So really it's about accessibility, ADA, AA, WCAG. Like, when is that going to be mandatory for all kind of government services? And then of course we'll generally see that trickle down into the private sector.
I'm going to kindly bunt that to maybe Nora, who might have some purview over or experience over that and working with USWDS. But I will say that there has been a lot of great work already done on accessibility. There is an accessibility guide that is on the website, and I can't think of it right now, but I can post it in the chat. So it's happening. It's slowly but surely. Yeah, I don't know, Nora, if you want to add to it, or Victor, if you have feedback on that.
Do you feel like public sector is ahead or behind public sector when it comes down to? I mean, we've seen a Domino's lawsuit, and it's a thing that businesses get sued now over non-accessible experiences. So, is the government kind of like, yeah, we do it when we have time to do it, or are they actually kind of like on the front seat?
I mean, as you say, it is the law, right? Accessibility is the law. People need to be Section 508 compliant. All government websites are supposed to follow that law. And I think what's really promising in government is that new development, a lot of the new development is being done with that in mind, right? So older websites may not all be compliant, but new websites are. Any projects that we work on follow that. And GSA also has the US Web Design System, which has all of that built in. So it's government centric and it's intended to already be compliant. All the components are accessible, and that's open source. Any agency, anyone can pick that up and reference that and use it in their design. Victor,
you said supposed to be. How do you feel about the fact it's actually not 100%? And nothing is always 100%. But do you feel like there is still a lot of work to be done, even though it's the law and there's like a benchmark that's been accessed? But do you feel like there's still a lot of work to be done there?
There is still work to be done. I think the momentum is going the right direction.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Victor, you want to close this out?
The only thing I would add is to look at what Nora and Elisa are doing. One of the reasons I was happy to be at 18F with them when I was the strategy was different. So I have done work where I served as a policy advisor, science and technology policy advisor, and the strategy was create the law and then everything changes, which the law is still important and it still has its place. But I think what the type of work that Nora and Elisa are doing over there at 18F is a bit of a different strategy where it's just deliver the product, deliver the service, and through the delivery, things begin to change. So instead of saying, hey, let's push and force and fight people to create a law on open source, what if we just created so many government projects that were open source or use open source code that agencies had to make a policy around it, and then the government had to make a policy around it. So it's kind of like an indirect approach towards that. So I think what it is, it's more about building a coalition. We still want to see the law, like we still want to see Section 508 go beyond what it currently is, what it mandates, as new accessibility requirements change, as we know more and more. But it's hard in government to do that. So one of the ways you do that is to build a coalition and a community of people that are pushing beyond those boundaries, and then eventually the law tends to catch up. It's a different strategy, but it is one that I've seen work in other areas. So, and that's what they do, Elisa and Nora. So I just wanted to call out that strategy.
Cool. Thank you so much, Elisa, Victor, Nora. This was fantastic to have an inside look at what you do. I know you probably don't feel the same way, right? We never feel like it's very exciting what we do, but it's very interesting for us to know that you're doing very good work for, making the world a better place that we always would like government work to be. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Everybody has been really, really enthusiastic about your answers, and I wish we had more time, because I think we just basically scratch the surface here. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your experience and toolkits and methodology, and maybe we'll get to talk to you again next year. We'll see how 2021 goes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a good one.